Inside Intel, the chipmaker's antitrust violations and bribery scandals. In the early 2000s, if you owned a personal computer, there was an overwhelming chance it bore a small sticker with 4 simple words that had become synonymous with computing power. Intel Inside. By 2005, Intel Corporation controlled over 80% of the global microprocessor market, a dominance so complete that the company's chips powered 9 out of every 10 computers sold worldwide. This wasn't just market leadership. It was near total monopolization of the most critical component in personal computing. But behind that famous jingle and those ubiquitous stickers lay one of the most sophisticated and far-reaching antitrust schemes in corporate history. Between 1999 and 2009, Intel systematically abused its market position through a web of illegal rebates, loyalty payments, and outright bribes that would ultimately cost the company over $2 billion in fines and settlements across 3 continents. This is the story of how the world's largest semiconductor company transformed from an innovation pioneer into a corporate criminal, wielding its monopoly power like a weapon against competitors, customers, and ultimately, consumers worldwide. The foundation of Intel's illegal scheme rested on what the company euphemistically called market development funds and rebate programs, but which were, in reality, elaborate bribery systems designed to keep competitors out of the market. Starting in 1999, Intel began offering computer manufacturers massive financial incentives, often worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually, in exchange for exclusive or near-exclusive use of Intel processors. Dell, the world's largest PC manufacturer at the time, received over $6 billion from Intel between 2002 and 2006 alone, with these payments representing up to 76% of Dell's annual operating income in some years. The arrangement was devastatingly simple. As long as Dell purchased at least 95% of its processors from Intel, the money flowed freely. But if Dell dared to buy chips from Intel's primary competitor, Advanced Micro Devices, even for a small pilot program, Intel threatened to cut off all payments immediately. HP received similar treatment, with Intel paying the computer giant over $200 million annually while demanding that HP limit AMD processors to less than 5% of its total purchases. These weren't legitimate volume discounts or competitive pricing. They were conditional payments designed specifically to exclude rivals from the market, and they violated antitrust laws in virtually every jurisdiction where Intel operated. The scope of Intel's bribery extended far beyond American computer manufacturers. In Asia, Intel's scheme reached new levels of audacity and illegality. The company paid Sony over $27 million to delay the launch of AMD-based products, effectively bribing the electronics giant to keep competing processors off the market. Toshiba received over $23 million in conditional payments, while Fujitsu was paid over $20 million, all tied to agreements that limited or eliminated their use of non-Intel processors. But perhaps most shocking was Intel's treatment of its customers who dared to consider alternatives. When Acer, the Taiwanese computer manufacturer, increased its purchases of AMD processors from 10 to 20% of its total volume, Intel immediately retaliated by raising Acer's processor prices and threatening to cut off all marketing support. The message was crystal clear. Loyalty to Intel would be rewarded, but any deviation would be punished swiftly and severely. This wasn't competition. It was extortion dressed up in corporate contracts and marketing agreements. Intel's illegal activities weren't limited to manufacturer bribes. The company also systematically sabotaged software companies to maintain its hardware monopoly. In one of the most egregious examples, Intel deliberately designed its compiler software, the tool that translates programming code into machine language, to produce slower, less efficient code when running on AMD processors, even when AMD's chips were technically superior. This meant that software developed using Intel's widely distributed programming tools would automatically run worse on competing hardware, creating an artificial performance gap that had nothing to do with actual chip quality. Intel also paid major software companies, including Microsoft, to optimize their programs exclusively for Intel architecture while ignoring or deliberately degrading performance on AMD systems. The company spent over $50 million annually on these software manipulation schemes, creating an ecosystem where Intel processors appeared faster not because of superior engineering, but because of deliberate sabotage of the competition. When benchmark tests showed AMD processors outperforming Intel chips, Intel would pressure testing companies to change their methodologies or face loss of advertising revenue and technical support. The human cost of Intel's monopolistic behavior became clear through the story of Advanced Micro Devices, a company that should have been Intel's primary competitor, but was instead systematically starved out of the market through Intel's illegal practices. Despite producing processors that were often technically superior to Intel's offerings, particularly in the crucial years between 2003 and 2006, when AMD's Athlon and Opteron chips outperformed Intel's Pentium 4 series, AMD's market share remained artificially suppressed below 20%. Every time AMD won a design victory with a major manufacturer, Intel would swoop in with loyalty payments so large that the manufacturer would reverse course. When AMD's superior 64-bit processors threatened to revolutionize computing, Intel used its illegal rebate schemes to prevent widespread adoption, delaying innovation and forcing consumers to purchase inferior products at inflated prices. The irony was devastating. In a free market, AMD's technical superiority during this period should have translated to significant market gains. But Intel's illegal practices ensured that superior technology was systematically blocked from reaching consumers. AMD's revenues stagnated while Intel's grew by billions, not because Intel made better products, but because Intel had criminally rigged the game. The global nature of Intel's antitrust violations began to unravel in 2005 when Japan's Fair Trade Commission launched the first major investigation into the company's practices. Japanese regulators discovered that Intel had paid local computer manufacturers, including NEC and Hitachi, over $180 million in illegal rebates tied to exclusivity agreements. The payments were structured through complex subsidiary arrangements designed to hide their true purpose. But investigators found email evidence showing Intel executives explicitly discussing how to eliminate AMD from the Japanese market through financial incentives. In one particularly damning internal communication, an Intel executive wrote about the need to cut off AMD's air supply in Japan through aggressive rebate programs. The Japanese investigation revealed that Intel's illegal practices had resulted in AMD's market share in Japan dropping to less than 5%, despite offering competitive products at lower prices. In 2005, Japan imposed a fine of 800 million yen on Intel, the largest penalty ever assessed by the Japan Fair Trade Commission at that time. The European Union's investigation, launched in 2007, proved even more devastating to Intel's carefully constructed facade of legitimate business practices. After a comprehensive 2-year investigation that examined millions of documents and interviewed hundreds of witnesses across dozens of companies, the European Commission concluded that Intel had engaged in the most serious antitrust violations in EU history. The evidence was overwhelming. Intel had paid manufacturers over 1 billion euros in conditional rebates, deliberately structured to exclude AMD from the market. The Commission found that Intel's rebates weren't based on cost savings or efficiency gains, but were calculated specifically to match or exceed any possible savings manufacturers might achieve by purchasing AMD processors. In effect, Intel was paying manufacturers to reject superior competing products regardless of price. European investigators also uncovered Intel's naked restrictions, direct payments to manufacturers not to use AMD processors at all, rather than simply preferencing Intel chips. MediaMarkt Saturn, Europe's largest electronics retailer, received payments to delay the launch of AMD-based computers, while Intel paid manufacturers to cancel already announced AMD product lines. In 2009, the European Union imposed a record-breaking fine of 1.06 billion euros on Intel, declaring the company's behavior the most serious violation of competition law in the Commission's 50-year history. The United States Federal Trade Commission's investigation, begun in 2008, revealed the domestic scope of Intel's criminal enterprise with stunning clarity. American regulators discovered that Intel's illegal rebate schemes had cost consumers billions of dollars in higher prices and reduced innovation over the course of a decade. The FTC's complaint, filed in 2009, detailed how Intel had threatened to cut off crucial technical support and marketing funds if manufacturers increased their use of AMD processors beyond Intel's dictated limits. When Dell briefly considered offering AMD-based servers in 2004, Intel executives immediately flew to Dell headquarters with threats to terminate the company's preferential pricing and technical support. The pressure was so intense that Dell's executives later described feeling imprisoned by Intel's demands. The FTC also uncovered Intel's practice of design wins sabotage, where Intel would offer massive one-time payments to manufacturers who had already committed to using AMD processors for specific product lines, effectively paying them to break their agreements with AMD. The investigation revealed that Intel's systematic exclusion of AMD had resulted in artificially inflated processor prices across the industry, with consumers paying an estimated 20 to 30% more for computers than they would have in a competitive market. The financial reckoning for Intel's decade of antitrust violations was swift and severe once regulators worldwide began coordinating their investigations. In 2009 alone, Intel paid over $1.5 billion in fines to the European Union and agreed to a Federal Trade Commission settlement that fundamentally restructured how the company could conduct business. The European fine represented the largest antitrust penalty in history at that time, while the FTC settlement imposed unprecedented restrictions on Intel's ability to offer conditional rebates or exclusive dealing arrangements. But the regulatory penalties were only the beginning of Intel's legal troubles. AMD filed a comprehensive antitrust lawsuit that resulted in a $1.25 billion settlement in 2009, with Intel admitting no wrongdoing but agreeing to pay damages for the competitive harm caused by its illegal practices. Class action lawsuits from consumers and indirect purchasers resulted in additional settlements totaling over $800 million. In total, Intel's antitrust violations cost the company more than $4 billion in fines, settlements, and legal fees, making it one of the most expensive corporate crime sprees in history. The aftermath of Intel's antitrust scandal fundamentally reshaped the semiconductor industry and provided crucial lessons about the dangers of unchecked monopoly power in technology markets. The regulatory settlements imposed on Intel included detailed compliance programs requiring the company to offer genuine competitive pricing without conditional rebates, allow manufacturers to freely choose processors based on merit rather than financial coercion, and provide equal technical support regardless of a manufacturer's processor mix. These changes, combined with the massive financial penalties, created space for real competition to emerge in the processor market for the first time in over a decade. AMD was able to regain market share and invest in new technologies, while new competitors began developing alternative processor architectures. The scandal also established important legal precedents for how antitrust law applies to technology markets, particularly regarding the use of loyalty rebates and exclusive dealing arrangements. Most significantly, Intel's prosecution demonstrated that even the most sophisticated multinational corporations cannot escape accountability for systematic antitrust violations, regardless of their economic importance or political influence. The company's executives learned that in the 21st century global economy, antitrust crimes committed in one jurisdiction would face prosecution worldwide, making illegal monopolization strategies not just morally indefensible, but financially catastrophic. Today, Intel Inside may still be a familiar phrase, but it serves as a reminder that corporate power without accountability inevitably leads to abuse, and that even the mightiest monopolies will eventually face the consequences of their crimes.